Hello, everyone. Welcome to day 2 of the gLOCAL Evaluation Week and to this webinar organized by the Caribbean Evaluators International. CEI. Something just happened here on my screen. Okay, I'll just go ahead. We began as an organization in 2014, and the CEI is registered in Jamaica. I am Lennise Baptiste, current board member. Organized by the Global Evaluation Initiative, this activity is part of the gLOCAL Evaluation Week, which runs internationally. And this year it's going to run from May 31st to June 4th. And so the CEI has joined with similar organizations around the world for a second time to participate in Evaluation Week. This Evaluation Week is about knowledge sharing and networking. And those things are aligned with the efforts of the CEI to provide opportunities for professional development, peer learning, and also provide thought leadership about the implementation of M&E in our Caribbean context. Our organization, led by President Valerie Gordon, has 10 board members. And we are made up of a group of professionals who work in different roles in the evaluation field in the Caribbean. Some members live in the region, some members live outside of the region, but our common purpose is to contribute to regional development through evaluation activities. However, when we work for the CEI, we do so as volunteers, members of our network. For today's panel, Innovative Approaches to M&E in the Caribbean region, we welcome Mrs. Marsha Hylton, Dr. Mairette Newman, Dr. Sandra Ortega, and Dr. Perry Hola. The four of them will be presenting their perspectives on innovation and innovation in M&E in particular, based on their particular projects. We welcome you. Our first presentation, titled Jamaica's Community Renewal Index, Measuring What Matters, will be done by the first panelist, Mrs. Marsha Hylton, who describes herself as a results-oriented monitoring and evaluation specialist and a qualified program evaluator with 10 years cumulative experience in the field. Since March 2017, she has been employed with the Planning Institute of Jamaica and the Community Renewal Program. In this role, she is responsible for establishing and implementing a robust and effective M&E system. Prior to this, she worked as Senior Education Officer with responsibility for program monitoring and evaluation for the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information in Jamaica. There, she designed and implemented program and policy evaluations and also evaluated components of the IDB World Bank funded Education System Transformation Program that led to the establishment of agencies such as the National Education Inspectorate, the National College for Educational Leadership, and the Jamaica Teacher Council. She holds an MSc in Psychology of Work from the University of Leicester, a graduate diploma in Public Policy and Program Evaluation from Carleton University, as well as a BA in Literatures and English Honors from the University of the West Indies. Mrs. Hylton is also a trained teacher, having earned a postgraduate diploma in teaching with distinction from the University of the West Indies. She wants you to know she's married with one son. Mrs. Hylton, I invite you to begin.
Thank you, Lennise. It's a pleasure to share today with our audience on the Community Renewal Index, which is one of the innovative tools that was developed by the Planning Institute of Jamaica. The focus of my presentation is what makes for a renewed community, measuring what matters. Now, my presentation will flow as follows. I will begin by establishing the context for the development of the index. Then I will elaborate on the conceptual features of the index as well as its dimensions. Then I will share some highlights from the application of this tool to 17 communities in Jamaica. And then I will end with some concluding statements. So I want to ground the Community Renewal Index within the Community Renewal Program, which was established in 2011 as a multi-level integrated intervention targeting the 100 most volatile and vulnerable communities in Jamaica. And 50%, more than 50% of these communities were in Kingston and St. Andrew. Now, one of the things we recognized from early on was the challenge that we would have in measuring the collective impact of all the various interventions that were being delivered within these communities. As I indicated before, the program was multi-level, many stakeholders, many projects, many different themes. However, all were contributing to this ultimate outcome of renewed communities. So therefore, we had this challenge. How do we ascertain whether or not we have achieved renewal status? We were also cognizant of the work that our international development partners were doing in these spaces. And we have some communities benefiting from 5 or more interventions that were being delivered with funding from our IDPs. So they, of course, also had an interest in understanding what kind of impact their support was, their investments were contributing to. So we came to a point where we had to acknowledge that billions of dollars were being invested in communities. And we also were confronted with the question, is this investment making a difference in the lives of the residents of these communities? We also were confronted with a number of strategic needs. Number one, what are the collective impact of these interventions? What is working? What is not working? And therefore, what are some best practices that we can capitalize on, scale up, and replicate? How sustainable are the outcomes of these various interventions being delivered by the various partners? And how can we ensure that we remain results focused? How can we ensure that we manage for results? We had all of these questions, but we had one fundamental question that lingered. How do we know when a community has been renewed? And it is on this basis that we embarked upon a process of developing the Community Renewal Index, with its first iteration being made in 2020. So in 2015, the need for the tool was identified. And between then and 2021, we embarked on a process, a very tedious, involved, and robust, we used a number of robust tools and methods to develop this index in collaboration with various stakeholders across the various sectors. Between 2019 and 2020, we applied the tool to 17 communities. And in March of this year, we launched this index. Now, the methodology was quite robust. We engaged in desk and literature review. We engaged a number of stakeholders, including community residents. We convened an expert review panel that was very instrumental in helping us to finalize the dimensions, the indicators, and the methodology. And we also had a number of validation sessions with local agencies and community leaders, which was used to garner their feedback on this tool. In the end, we agreed that we wanted this index to focus on a community as a geographical area where people are grouped based on common ownership and sharing of resources and assets, and where they share common objectives, interests, and needs. And as such, we also agreed that we wanted to define a renewed community as one that has been transformed from volatile and vulnerable to secure, cohesive, just, prosperous, and with healthy environments. And this was very important because in this way, we would be able to see how we are contributing to the achievement of Vision 2030 Jamaica, to which the Community Renewal Program is aligned and to which the index is aligned. So with those conceptual definitions established, we moved to ensure that we measured what mattered. In order to do that, we wanted to ensure that we provided a tool that allowed us to engage in evidence-based design and planning, a tool that measures what a renewed community looks like, connects all the various projects and interventions to overall community level development, and allowed us to compare communities based on their standings. So the Community Renewal Index is a single number, and that single number establishes the position of communities on a renewal continuum from 0, least renewed, to 100, most renewed. In terms of the characteristics of this index, it is
Marsha?
our intention, security, and health and environment. And each of these dimensions are characterized by a number of component indicators. So for health and environment, we focus on the health of the residents as well as the health of the environment through 3 indicators. For cohesion, we look at the extent to which the community is organized and coalescing around a common development agenda. For justice, we look at the degree of existence of justice points and the level of trust that the community residents have in the police. For prosperity, we focus on things such as education, employment, internet access, and the percentage of the non-poor. And finally, for security, we look at the absence of murders, other major crimes, as well as gangs. In addition to those component indicators, we apply a weighting. We applied a weighting to each of these 5 dimensions. And from the screen here, you can see that prosperity is weighted the highest, followed by security, health and environment, cohesion, and justice mechanisms. And in terms of the process of arriving at the index, we collected the data from our various data sources, both primary and secondary data. And the values were, we calculated the weighted sum using the values from those indicators, and those were used to generate a score for each of these 17 communities. And these scores became the basis for ranking the communities from 0 through to 100. 100 being the maximum. Now, some things I want us to be mindful of are the do's and don'ts of this CRI. And I won't go over everything, but just to highlight some of the most important ones. Certainly, we want it to be used to identify those communities that are least renewed and most renewed. We also want to compare communities within each parish, and we also want to ensure that we use the indicator value, the indicator data, to compare absolute change over time. However, the index cannot be used to quantify how much more renewed one community is over another. The rankings cannot be utilized in that particular way. So I'm going to end by sharing some insights from our application of this tool to 17 communities in Kingston and St. Andrew. I also want to highlight that this information represents a baseline condition for these communities. So as of 2020, this is their renewal status. So this graph indicates how renewed these 17 communities are. And one of the things I want to point out is that approximately about 14 or 15 of these communities are coalescing in the 40 to 60 range, which means that more than 50% of these communities are at the midway point in terms of renewal. And bearing in mind that the maximum score of 100 is the ideal score for renewal. So the index itself allows us to see where the communities are in terms of their overall score on this index. The other thing that the index allows us to do is to really look at the overall picture. And the overall picture indicates that all the 17 communities are averaging a score of 57.31 out of 100, which means that they are 42.69 points short of the ideal renewal score of 100. The index also allows us to see the dimension scores and the rankings for each community. And this is very, very important because it allows us to be very targeted in assessing the development gaps that exist in each community. So among some of the findings that I want to highlight relates to the 5 specific dimensions. So the first question, how healthy, cohesive, and secure are our communities? And you can see that all of the communities are fairly healthy, fairly cohesive, and fairly secure. However, there are some variances that establish the gap that exists between the current state and the desired state for each of these dimensions. So for example, for security, communities are averaging 17.22 out of 25. That's the maximum score for this dimension. So they have a gap of 7.78.
Freezing.
It is the lowest dimension.
Lennise, maybe you might want to suggest she switches off her camera and just use audio.
Okay, but if she comes back on, let me just, Marsha. No,
Of the 5, internet access and
Marsha, Valerie, is it possible for you to do a WhatsApp to her, if possible? Okay, folks, we seem to have lost Marsha there for a moment, but I can attempt just to, well, I would just attempt to say, not to revamp everything she said so far, but she's presented a very interesting tool that's looking at communities, assessing communities, and I would say very loosely their development. Looking at security, justice, health and environment within the communities, community cohesion and prosperity. And they were able to come up with, an index of sorts that helped them to get what she described as the overall picture of the communities and the development needs that they would, and development needs in terms of planning for those communities, whatever interventions are planned for those communities. What I found was interesting is that the index was not supposed to compare one community against each other or rank the communities in terms of most developed, but I like the idea of the most renewed. I found that was very interesting and very innovative.
Lennise, she's back.
Okay.
Maybe we could allow her.
Marsha?
And ask the other persons with cameras on just to turn off their camera. Perhaps, Marsha, you can improve your bandwidth maybe by turning off yours as well.
Okay, will do.
Just a suggestion.
I think I'm trying to. Okay, all right. All right, so I was in the middle of just highlighting just a note on the score variability. So across the 17 communities, we found that the scores are pretty consistent for security and justice mechanisms. However, there was the greatest variability was in the scores for prosperity, health and environment, and cohesion. So in terms of the administration of the index, between now and 2030, which is a target date for the achievement of Vision 2030, we certainly want to apply this index every 2 years. And we want to expand the index to other communities. The aim is to identify and assess the gaps that exist within these communities and close those gaps. And in so doing, improve not just the average score for all communities, but also the community level scores and also the dimension scores. However, in order to do this, we recognize that the community renewal process, it has to be underpinned by a response that is multidimensional. So it addresses all of the dimensions that are associated with this community is being vulnerable and volatile. The response also has to be transversal. We have a number of issues that are intersecting, and we want to ensure that the response is so targeted and comprehensive that it is able to address all those issues at the same time. We also recognize that the response has to be nuanced. It cannot be a one-size-fits-all. So the score for each community would give a pretty good idea of the kind of specific response that needs to be designed and implemented. Closing the gap also means integration and coordination of efforts. It means having an appropriate mix and the scale of programs and projects. Oftentimes we find that there is a preponderance of infrastructure projects and public training, but what about the other dimensions that are there? What about designing and implementing interventions that work under those dimensions to ensure that we have an appropriate mix? And in terms of the scale, the programs are of a particular scale that we're able to effect the kind of changes that we need. Closing the gap also means that our policies must favor these particular communities. It means that our planning and intervention design must be evidence-based. And last but certainly not least,
Marsha?
it means that we must prioritize and leverage.
And leverage M&E.
Okay. Marsha, are you able to come back in? Okay.
Money, prioritize.
Okay, she seems to be having a challenge. Yeah. Marsha? Okay. I will just attempt again. I will. I like the idea that this really is a tool designed to close the gap among communities and within communities in the areas of security, justice, health and environment, having community cohesion and prosperity. The responses based on the scores in that community renewal index would mean a development of initiatives to address the gaps in the community. And I was very happy to hear say that the responses would not be a one size fits all, okay? And that whatever services are provided should be integrated and coordinated. And I think that's something that all of us who have to, access government services, we always wish there could be more coordination, or if there are initiatives that are started by donor agencies, particularly that we have to access, that we wish there could be more harmonization in the approaches. So Marsha, I want to thank you very much for opening our session today. You provided a tool that is certainly innovative, and the innovation that comes with how we're looking at communities and how we could target development for communities, development initiatives. So thank you very much. Our second presentation on monitoring and evaluation as a process of continuous improvement is being chaired by Dr. Mairette Newman, who is an education specialist at the Commonwealth of Learning. She has a responsibility for the virtual university for small states of the Commonwealth. This virtual university partners with ministries and post-secondary institutions in the Caribbean, Africa, and Pacific regions. And she designs and manages projects that build capacity in open and distance learning. Prior to joining COL, she lectured at the University of the West Indies and the University of Technology in Jamaica. Her areas of expertise include educational leadership, online pedagogy, and teacher education. She holds an undergraduate degree from the National University of Ireland, a postgraduate diploma in education from Trinity College, Dublin, master's in education from the University of the West Indies, and a doctorate in education from Griffith University, Australia. Dr. Newman, I invite you to begin.
Thank you very much, Lennise. Good afternoon, everybody. And thank you to the organization for inviting me to participate. And a disclaimer here, I think. I realize that I am amongst a set of monitoring and evaluation specialists. That I am not. And perhaps this explains to some extent the title of my presentation, because at CAL, and indeed for me on a personal level, this journey, monitoring and evaluation, it's a learning journey. And my organization is learning and improving all the time. And I too am learning and improving all the time. And so my presentation is going to be somewhat different than what Marsha presented, in that what I'm going to do is actually talk about using some examples from projects in the Caribbean. I'm really going to talk perhaps more generally about ways in which my organization is integrating what might be considered to be some innovative methods. So you see here the overall purpose of the presentation. I'm just going to begin with a quick overview about what CAL does, because I think you need to understand that in order to make sense of the examples that I will share with you shortly. So moving right in, I need to point out that we, as our name suggests, the Commonwealth of Learning, we serve the Commonwealth. So we're looking at 54 countries. Of those 54 countries, 32 are small states. And of course, 12 of those small states are actually in the Caribbean. What is it that we do? Very broadly speaking, you see here what we aim to do. We're supposed to help Commonwealth governments, Commonwealth institutions, mostly learning institutions, but not in all cases, as you'll see later. We help them to leverage technology, ICTs, to improve, expand access to learning for sustainable development. So that sort of spans.
Mairette, I need to stop you for a minute. Is it possible to put your presentation in presenter view? Because I think
not in presenter view.
No, we are seeing all of your notes.
Is that better?
Yes, much better.
Okay, sorry.
Okay,
sorry,
no problem. No problem. That's okay. That's okay.
Sorry. So what is it? I was saying that that's a very, very broad description of what we do, but this spans a number of initiatives that ranges from things like working with girls and young women to prevent early child marriages, to working with farmers, to working with the formal education system. So that would be ministries and universities and technical vocational institutions, so they can offer online and blended and distance programs. But the glue that's common to all of these initiatives is the use of technology, open and distance learning, and a philosophy of open education. Okay, so this slide here gives you a very quick overview of what our long-term outcomes are and what our shorter term, if you like, or sub-outcomes are. So we've adopted a results-based management approach. All of this is outlined in our strategic plan, and integral to that results-based management approach is a theory of change, as you would expect, and a monitoring and evaluation framework. So the logic model then is what summarizes our organization's initiatives, the outcomes and the impact we want to achieve, the performance indicators that we used, by which those outcomes and impact will be measured. So I've just shared here really, really quickly, you know, the areas that are covered here. You wouldn't be surprised to see things like employment, economic improvement, empowerment, etc. And then the next slide I'm not going to dwell on, but just to say that that results-based management is the guiding framework for our monitoring and evaluation. So to put it another way, our M&E plan operationalizes our results-based management framework. But I'm going to move on from that and go straight into what I think might perhaps interest you all most of all, and that is some of the features of our M&E, and this is not all of them, I've just selected a few, that I think are characteristics that are core to what we do. And the first is that we emphasize a participatory approach. That means stakeholders are involved in various aspects of the data collection, the reporting, and the reflection. The benefit of involving local persons in data collection is twofold. Firstly, it helps put the respondents and their family members at ease. It encourages more open and honest responses, sometimes to things that are perhaps difficult or sensitive. And the second thing it does is it builds the capacity of local persons to act as data collectors, and it really makes them partners in the data, which is very important to democratizing the process, which is important to us. The second feature that I want to highlight is that we harness the potential of technology to collect data and communicate the results. So we have online and offline data collection systems that are used for monitoring purposes. We have an evolving management information system, which facilitates the storage and the interrogation of the data. But we also use technology as part of the delivery and implementation of our initiatives. So for example, you're going to see in a little while where in the Lifelong Learning for Farmers initiative, we use mobile phones to deliver training on agriculture and financial literacy to rural farmers. The other two features that I've listed there, we value quantitative and qualitative data. Now, you may not think that that is particularly innovative, but for us it sort of is, because there was a focus up to 4 or 5 years ago, there was a focus very much on just collecting the numbers and the quantitative data, but we have shifted slightly with respect to this. And the fourth one, which I'm not going to dwell on, has to do with our focus on gender mainstreaming. So everything that we collect data that disaggregates what is happening with males and females. And of course, in some parts of the world, this is because males are marginalized, as in the Caribbean. In other parts of the world, it has to do with females. So I've chosen 3 projects that I'm going to talk about for the next 5 minutes. And when I get to the third project, Lennise is going to jump in. The first of these projects is a rapid assessment that was done of RADA text messages on agricultural disaster risk management. So this is part of the Lifelong Learning for Farmers initiatives. And it was in Jamaica. The Rural Agricultural Development Authority, RADA, was the partner. And one activity in this project was the use of text messages to advise farmers across Jamaica on the steps they could take to avoid or minimize the negative impact of natural disasters on their well-being. And so, having disseminated the messages, this evaluation was conducted to assess the achieved impact on the message recipients, and then to guide the further use of this medium by RADA and by other agencies across the Commonwealth. So as you see here, the evaluation surveyed 175 farmers in 13 parishes across the country, and they received the text messages. I'm not going to dwell on the findings, but perhaps what is most important to point out here is one of the challenges that we had. And I want to mention this challenge because it's going to come up again later. And it had to do with the fact that the partner was not actually able to give us the accurate and complete list of the farmers who were supposed to have been receiving the messages. And so it's a challenge. It may seem like a small challenge, but it had some pretty serious implications, which I'll raise again later. The second project that I want to speak to was in Belize. And this concerned open schooling. And for those of you who don't perhaps not familiar with the term open schooling really refers to that kind of learning and in schooling that occurs not in conventional schools, but usually for out of school youths, whether in the evening or at another time. And Belize wanted to move from having this in face-to-face classes to making the materials available online or via distance. So that project in Belize involved a range of processes and activities, involving capacity building, materials development, policy development, etc. And why I've chosen this one is because it was initially a conventional value for money analysis. But there were challenges with that, limitations to that. And so 2 alternative approaches were introduced, which gave a far better, robust, and perhaps more accurate, comprehensive view of identifying, documenting the benefits and the things in particular that were not necessarily anticipated originally. I realize that I'm running out of time a little bit, so I am going to move straight to the last of the initiatives. And this is the one that with which Lennise is most familiar. This was in Dominica. And the purpose here was to work with the Ministry of Education and Human Resource Development, who were attempting to do the 3 things that you see here. They wanted to enhance their own capacity to design and develop public education messages specifically about resilience. They wanted to see if they could have some sort of influence so that persons would be more aware about and have better knowledge of what it means to be climate resilient, and by extension, their capacity to mitigate against and respond to and recover from disaster would be enhanced. So the final evaluation focused on the progress made towards achieving the identified outcomes. And this is where Lennise was involved. And at this point, I think, Lennise, it would be appropriate for you to come in.
Great. So I came in at this point, and you can see from my pictures there, these are pictures, the 4 pictures on the right are the ones taken during the evaluation, and the one on the left was based on a request I made after the evaluation. So call, and this is one of my concerns as I wrote up, because I would say Mairette and I, we sort of fought a little bit over methodology to get this done, because I had to make some changes. I made some suggestions, and I think because they were not on the ground seeing what I was going through, they didn't always understand why I wanted to make some of the changes. Mairette, could you go back? Right, okay. So the context at the time, it was the week before, 2 weeks before election. I got on the ground. People who were supporting the party had done what they thought was going to do and thought it was necessary to help me. Some didn't want to help. There was a strike when I got there in the middle of data collection, so cars couldn't move. It was a lot of stuff going on. And then in terms of the finished product, having been on the radio and publicizing the way the project had said it was going to be, that was not done. So quickly, well, not quickly, before I got there, I anticipated we were going to have some challenges. And I developed these surveys specifically targeted to what was in the message, content of the messaging. And it was a good thing I did that, because I literally, when we got on the ground, had to go to schools and actually have the messages played, and students reacted, etc. And that was, the innovation here came from just getting on the ground and just having to move quickly, and then showing people that they could move quickly to get things done. I think that was something I was happy, because they felt the funder was so far away. Dr. Newman was, liaising with the person, but it was just so far away and they couldn't get things done. But it was about me just helping people to show people that you have what is needed to get things done.
Lennise?
Okay, I said, did I miss anything in my presentation?
No, I just lost contact
Okay.
for a moment.
Oh, okay, no, I was just saying, the important thing for me, Mairette, and something we discussed, that on the ground, people did not do what they were supposed to do. Mm-hmm. And it was just about helping them to recognize that they were more in control of their processes than they were actually embracing. They were not doing as they should be, because they felt it had to come from you, or it had to come from somebody high up in the department. But certainly they could have just gone ahead and made a phone call to say, come to the meeting, or get the parents there and that kind of thing. There were things that were in their hands that they did not do. But the politics, of course, it was 2 weeks before the elections and it was very hot. So, okay.
And I think that that's a wonderful example of how context really counts. And I think, Marsha's presentation, she talked about this idea, or somebody mentioned, one size does not fit all. So with all the planning in the world, nobody could have predicted, A, that elections were going to be called at that particular time, B, that the kinds of civil, I don't want to call it civil unrest. It wasn't quite unrest, was it? But it was certainly unease on the ground. There were roadblocks and so on, if I remember correctly. Yes. We couldn't have predicted all of that. And so, context really does count. And I think that also leads to the sort of the final slide that I want to share here, which has to do with issues and how we go about improving our monitoring and evaluation. So, oops, sorry, I'm beating it myself here. One of the issues for us, and the example that Lennise has shared is a really good illustration, is very often we're working with institutions and with partners whose capacity to monitor and evaluate really needs building up. And this is, and it links to the second issue that you see there, the absence of verifiable evidence, which I think was also something, Lennise, that you grappled with, the fact that there really wasn't a whole lot of evidence. And so you were, in a sense, almost doing some of that data collection yourself. So there are two issues that we have been dealing with. Some of the ways in which we've attempted to address these things are, we are integrating now the monitoring and evaluation expectations into the agreements that we have with our partners. So we're actually involving our partners in the design of the monitoring and evaluation. And at the same time, we're providing them with some training throughout the project. But the truth is, this is not always easy. And it's not easy because they're not always particularly interested in the monitoring and evaluation part of things, or they don't see the necessity, or it just becomes one more additional burdensome task, or a series of tasks that they have to carry out on top of their regular jobs. So it's an uphill task. We are making some headway with it. One of the other things that we have done is we have identified monitoring and evaluation leads in some of these partner institutions. These are people who are interested in monitoring and evaluation. They have a passion for it. They understand the importance. And that is also beginning to help us. But we ourselves, as you see in the third block here, are also aiming to improve our approach to monitoring and evaluation. We're constantly improving our tools and our systems. We're standardizing our data hub, and we are involved in capacity development as well. I had meant to say earlier, just before I close, if anybody is interested in looking in more detail at the three projects that I spoke about, there are links to the evaluation studies, so I can share those. And in fact, they're on the slides, so I can share the slides later with the organizers if you wish, and then you can link to the full studies and read the full reports for yourselves. Thank you all very much for listening.
Mairette, thank you very much. Your presentation highlighted the challenges with remote project management, especially around M&E. When I got on the ground there, there was a readiness, not that the project could not be evaluated, but just a whole readiness for data collection, a whole readiness to carry out the evaluation process. That was certainly not what, no, the context wasn't ready. Let me just leave it at that. But I'm just pleased to hear that the Commonwealth of Learning is adopting what I call, in addition to the RBM, but it's more like a utilization-focused evaluation approach, because you're actually helping people to identify what is the information that they need to move on, you know, and different levels of stakeholders are doing that as you move forward. And of course, the organization itself is improving. And then you also highlighted something that we grapple with as evaluators. Interest is low. In every evaluation context, we could tell you interest in evaluation is low. People do feel as if M&E tasks are onerous and burdensome. But certainly your effort to identify M&E leads each time, I think that would certainly help you with the remote project management. Okay, so thank you very much, Mairette. Okay, our third presenter is Dr. Sandra Ortega, and her approach would be a comparison, she's called it a comparison from a traveling evaluator. She's an independent evaluator living in Ohio, but she works throughout the US. Dr. Sandra Ortega describes her work style as bridging research and practice. The majority of her work focuses on evaluating violence prevention programs. Dr. Ortega earned her PhD in quantitative research and evaluation methods in education from the Ohio State University. She uses a mixed methods approach in data collection and analysis to improve the outcomes for program recipients and clients. Her research includes collaboration across systems to promote data use in decision-making. Dr. Ortega is driven by her passion to learn from people how best to improve the programs that they're involved with and the strategies and systems that can help to prevent violence. Dr. Ortega, I invite you to begin.
Thank you. Can you hear me, Lennise?
Yes, I'm hearing you clearly.
Okay, great. Thank you. And thanks to the other presenters, Marsha, Mairette, and Perry, for sharing this space with me. I'm very excited to be here today and to travel through Zoom to work together to share the different approaches that we use in monitoring and evaluation to serve the clients that we serve. When Lennise first approached me with the opportunity to have this conversation with y'all today, I started to prepare by looking at the Sustainable Development Goals. I'm not quite sure what I'm.
You're fine, Sandy?
Oh, I'm fine. I just saw something pop up. Okay.
No, you're fine. Okay, go ahead.
I looked at the 17 Sustainable Development Goals and saw my work fitting with the 3 specific goals that you see on the screen. Those 3 Sustainable Development Goals are good health and well-being, gender equality, and reduced inequality.
Sandy, just check your mic. You're muted. Okay, better.
As Lennise said in the beginning of the conversation, I work as an empowerment evaluator, and most of my work is in violence prevention. And as we know, violence prevention is grounded in reducing inequalities and ensuring that people have good health and well-being, and reducing gender inequality, so improving gender equality. I think all 3 of those goals fit very well into my work. The majority of my work in the United States for over the past 20 years has been in violence prevention and health and well-being of families, most recently, and health and well-being of families. Most recently, say the past 12 years, my focus has been on working specifically in gender-based violence prevention. And at the core of gender-based violence prevention is reducing inequalities, specifically policies and practices that create environments where gender-based violence perpetration can thrive. My work is focused specifically on gender-based violence perpetration prevention, which I think that is innovative. Most of the work that goes in the United States has focused on victimization and prevention of victimization, whereas our focus is on the prevention of perpetration of violence. So my work is focused on working at the state level and with local practitioners to shift policies and social norms so perpetration is prevented from happening in the first place. And 2 of the projects that I've been supporting as an evaluator are funded through the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. This work centers on the belief that safe, stable, and nurturing relationships and communities will thrive through the reduction of health disparities and inequalities. I really think the innovative part of the work is the prevention of perpetration, and also the framework that I use as an evaluator. As I said earlier, I'm an empowerment evaluator. And empowerment evaluation is a framework that was developed by David Fetterman in California. And it's pretty well known, I think, by now. But when they started using this model or framework about 15 years ago, maybe even 20, it wasn't very well known. But their empowerment evaluation includes 10 principles. And the first principle is improvement. Second is community ownership. The third is inclusion, democratic participation, social justice, community knowledge, evidence-based strategies and practices, capacity building, organizational learning, and accountability. And a lot of what the work that I do in the United States, specifically with the state level projects, is building their capacity and learning together with them how to measure prevention. And that's difficult because how do you know that prevention is working? How do you know what is working and what isn't working when it comes to prevention? We're learning together as we take that journey. I'm going to talk about the project that I worked on Belize. I'm hearing some background sound. Sorry? In 2015, my dear friend and colleague Lennise Baptiste invited me to partner with an amazing team to work on the Citizen Security Project. I must say I was very humbled and excited to be able to spend the winter months in Trinidad and Tobago instead of in Ohio, where we get feet of snow, as Lennise can say, since she was in Ohio for several years working on her PhD. I was also really excited to get into the field because, as I said, most of my work is at the state level. And at the state level, I don't really get the opportunity to do field work. So Lennise and the rest of the team and I were really excited to be able to work in the field, collecting information, using empowerment evaluation principles in order to understand the communities. And as Mairette and Marsha talked about, was the context. So much of our work is context driven. And if we're not in the field, how do we really understand the context to make sure that what we're doing is really supporting that community growth and development? Lennise, do you want to talk about the innovation as far as the Q-sort method that you used?
Yes, I can come in here. I think I have to share my screen now. I think you have to stop sharing. Okay, you have it on. Great. Okay. So so we went into the community. We are working in 22, what was described then as high needs communities. The literature had described it to as hotspots. So I took this team. I had 2 people who did not live in Trinidad and 2 people who lived in Trinidad and myself to go into these 22 high needs communities. Of course, people scared us about, you know, they going in there and they're not sure. And sometimes they were supposed to send police escorts for all of that. But we only had police escorts one day, and that was to take us to the police statistical office. We didn't see the police any other time besides that. But like I said, there were 2 concerns. Now, when you're collecting data in a high needs community where there are gangs and guns, etc., people always have to be very careful about what they say in a public setting. So that the concern of collecting this data was to make sure that when we left, people would be safe, and that the team as well would be safe, and nobody would try to shoot us on our way out. So we using community cohesion, the theories, we came up with 30 statements. Now using those 30 statements is part of something called Q methodology. So I developed a Q sort where I had these 30 statements. I created packages, and each person in the meeting got these 30 statements with the instruction, separate them into what is common to what is not common in your community. All these statements written, as you see, we have some examples here. These were the statements from the perception of safety in your community. And they were written in a way that, you know, people limit the places. You see that people limit the, no, go back, Sandy. Yeah, people limit places. Sandy, can you go back to my, I don't know what's happening. Right, yes. Okay, yes, so it was written so that persons could read it, and they will place it accordingly to their perception of their community. So you'll see what we did there. Now, we also had other categories for the statements. They were into community values, neighborliness, belonging, trust, safety, willingness to intervene, community relations, because as we went through the theories and the literature on community cohesion, we found that those were the issues. So we actually looked in the literature, looked at different things to find our statements. Okay, you can go to the next slide. So that when they got their statements into common, and when they sorted the statements into common and uncommon now, they then had to take each of those statements in each category now and then rank them as from most common to least common. Now that took a little more explaining to folks, but when they got it, they were able to say, well, okay, robberies happen more than child abuse. So, you know, so they themselves did that. Now, depending on where they put it on this sheet of paper that we developed, we knew the rankings, we knew the ratings, right? And so we were able to come up with this. If you notice, in the Bethel community, which is in the first square grid, rectangular grid, you see that, for instance, statement 22, which is a statement that reads, we have some form of self-protection in our community. In Bethel, they were saying it's not common, but notice it's less, it is not common, but it's not very uncommon, if you understand what I mean. But look at where for the community of enterprise, where 22 is. So even though we didn't ask people in a formal way for everyone else to hear, do you have guns in this community? We didn't do that. But based on how people sorted the statements, it came up that in enterprise community, there were guns around. And then in the Laramie community, you realize that the thing that was most uncommon was that statement 22. So QSORT is just a methodology that helps people to, as I like to say, everybody contributes to the analysis. You know, everybody's opinion is considered because it's rankings, it's averages, it's factor analysis. All of that is involved in doing this in this QSORT methodology. But it really helps when you're working with small groups, or it could help with a very large group where you can tease out what is really the main feature that is, that is preventing progress. In this case, the safety issue that would be in enterprise would be looking for the guns, and that would be less common than being in Bethel or in Laramie. Okay, so Sandy, you can go ahead now.
Thanks, Lennise. I think that one of the things that comes out in using this QSORT methodology is that it aligns really well with an empowerment evaluation model. And for me, the goodness of fit was there because we were learning so much from the community. Everyone was participating. Sometimes we thought our meetings would be like an hour, hour and a half, and they ended up being 2.5 hours because people really wanted to contribute. And, as someone said earlier, it's kind of difficult if we just go in as the evaluator and we do not understand the community context and what those factors are in the community. This is a process that allows us to get that information in a way that I felt was very democratic. It was very participatory, and I believe that the folks from the communities really felt empowered to tell their stories and to let us know what the assets were in those communities and resources, and really to prioritize what they felt was needed in order to keep those communities safe. Lennise?
Yes, I agree with you, Sandy. So the innovation here was really around the safety issue. How do we address the safety issue? But when I was remember doing the PhD, remember doing Q. Not many people did Q, and so I remember at one point Dr. Brown just questioning, the relevance of it, but it is really relevant in especially during the work of evaluation. Okay, so Sandy, are you at the end, or are you? Is there anything else you'd like to say to wrap up, Sandy?
I'd like to recognize Dr. Perry's time because I know we're running behind, so that's why I was kind of moving through.
Great. Okay, so thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Ortega, for taking us through a model around empowerment evaluation. For those who would like to learn more about empowerment evaluation, it's David Fetterman. If you Google him, you would see the principles of empowerment evaluation. And it's really a model around in which the M&E person acts as coach and guide, and it's all about democracy and doing things together as a community and being accountable for achieving the outcomes. Right, so we go on to the fourth presentation now. And we have this fourth presentation is by Dr. Perry Pola on the innovative use of M&E strategies in UWE's EU-funded built environment projects. Dr. Pola is now the program manager of the HIT Reset Caribbean Project, jointly funded by the EU and the Organization of Caribbean and Pacific States. He's also the program coordinator at the Caribbean Network for Urban and Land Management, and it's called the CNULM. And in 2016, the CEI, they adopted us as co-hosts, and 3 of us went to Suriname and we presented a workshop on M&E for urban planners. Dr. Paula has managed numerous projects for the European Union and other international donors. He's currently managing the program Harnessing Innovative Technologies to Support Resilient Settlements on the Coastal Zones of the Caribbean. He was formerly an insect pathologist at KBCLA with major works in biological pesticide development and invasive species. He also does historical and cultural research and makes film as a form of research communication. He has many publications which are available on researchgate.net. He holds a PhD and a BSc from UWI. He's a certified Prince 2 project manager from the UK, and he also has training in business management, resource mobilization, biotechnology, and urban planning and management. Dr. Paula, I invite you to begin.
Okay, thank you very much, Lennise. As Lennise mentioned, the topic of my presentation is the innovative use of M&E strategies in the University of the West Indies, European Union funded built environment projects. Okay. All right, it's sticking a little bit. Right. Okay. In terms of where I work, the Caribbean Network for Urban and Land Management is effectively a project management unit based at the University of the West Indies. We work, we through our advocacy actions in land use planning, but when we do develop large projects, we run them through the University of the West Indies. So mainly, we are a networking organization that brings together planners, planning associations, universities, agencies, and organizations, all involved in sustainable urbanization. Now, we generally rely on the resources of the members. So we do ask people to give up their time and the resources of the organization, but we also manage donor-funded projects. Just to say one thing about our key activity, the Caribbean Urban Forum, it's a conference that brings together planners, high-level decision makers, academics, municipal managers, and other urban professionals for policy dialogue, knowledge sharing, and capacity building on urban sector issues. So we have a lot of things that go on at that conference. So we really try to advance the urban agendas in that conference. It's been going on for 10 years. And this year, it is being hosted online from the 16th to the 18th of June. And if you want more information on it, you can just type in Caribbean Urban Forum 2021 or go to the University of Guyana website, and you will be able to get more information and access the conference for free. Now, I would like to just talk about 4 of the European Union funded projects that I have dealt with since 2009, very briefly. The strengthen research, development, and uptake capacity in urban, land, and municipal management in the Caribbean, which we call NSUS, basically involved trying to get research to drive policy and use policy to drive research. So we actually developed a Caribbean urban agenda out of this so that we could understand what are the key issues affecting urban communities in the region. The second project I'd like to make mention of is mainstreaming energy efficiency and climate change in built environment training and research in the Caribbean. We call that project Car and Train. In essence, that project was trying to improve energy security in the Caribbean and mitigate against climate change by improving energy efficiency in the areas of buildings, transportation, and urban sprawl. The third project that we recently were involved in is engaging students in sustainable cities. We call that City Labs CAR. And that project aimed to
Harry? Okay. Are we and Nicole, any suggestions?
He seems to try to join back in. I think we can probably, I think we've turned off our mics and our videos already.
Yes.
I think if some of us could probably mute our mics, we may have a little bit more bandwidth.
Right, okay.
Okay.
He is muted, I think.
He's muted now, I think.
I mean, everybody's muted. Or maybe he's
Everybody's
signing back
muted.
So
in.
he slipped out. I think he
Yeah,
may
he's
need
gonna
use
sign
his-
back in, I'm sure.
Okay, fine. Okay.
Just give him a minute.
Well, he's certainly showing us M&E across different environments, different settings, you know, different kinds of projects. Okay.
He's
Should
still
I?
not back on.
Is it, sorry.
Internet.
Let me tell him on WhatsApp and let me see how if he's completely off.
Yeah, hi, Lennise. Yes, I realized I got cut off.
Okay, great.
Could you tell me where I got cut off?
You were talking about your fourth, the third project with the students, the build cities.
Yeah. Okay. So just to mention the second one, I would have mentioned that the second project aimed to revise curricula to teach people more about energy efficiency so that when they graduate, they could impact and they go into their jobs, they could impact policy, they could introduce new technologies that will encourage energy efficiency. The third one is about problem-based learning, which would make people more adaptable and ready for the workplace environment. And the last one, harnessing innovative technologies to support resilient settlements on the coastal zones of the Caribbean. Hit Reset Caribbean aims to encourage innovation to improve planning and management in the Caribbean. Now that project, which is different from the other three, aims to sub-grant projects. So we are now the grantors of smaller projects. Now,
Harry, could you share your screen because we're not seeing your PowerPoint? Okay.
Oh, I have to give him co-host.
Yes, give him yes.
Is he there? Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Oh yeah, he got it.
Harry, okay, good. The blue sky timer is still there.
Want to close that?
Because it on I'm not sure what's happening. Right. I think Perry decided to share again. Perry, present a view. Right, great.
Sorry, the gist of what I want to talk about is that across 4 projects, we had different M&E strategies. Now, all the projects had audits, final audits. All of them had annual narrative and financial reports. And all of them benefited from feedback from the technical assistance unit from the EU. So we also benefit, all of them also benefit from that. And all of them had final evaluations where we would get an independent evaluator to come in and give an assessment of the project. Now, starting with Kind Train, we realized that midterm evaluations could be valuable in that it allowed you to get an idea of where your project has reached and take corrective action before we reach the final stage. Then we decided to do some changes to our when we are starting to hit our most recent project, Hit Reset Caribbean. We introduced the concept of structured annual evaluations. Now, I previously spoke about the Caribbean Urban Forum being an annual conference. So we're having all the project partners coming to this conference and stakeholders from the planning fraternity and the urban environment. So it's an ideal location to do an evaluation, an annual assessment, because everybody is there, which makes it cost effective. The other thing that we've started to do, and we learned this from the City Labs car project, is to have an evaluator, and this is Lennise, as part of the project. Lennise was also involved in Kind Train as well. But to have an evaluator as part of the project allows for feedback in real time. So every action of the project benefits from M&E advice. So far it's been working out very well, and I've learned a lot, but we can talk about that in the conclusions. Now, in terms of our grant applications, what we're trying to do is that we are allowing potential applicants to send in their grants in draft phase, right? For pilot phase. I'll get the, well, basically, we have a pilot phase and we have an open call phase to the project. In the pilot phase, we are asking, we are basically allowing applicants who we've pre-selected to send in draft applications. Now, what we did is that we wrote a very simplified application form. And we are seeing how well persons fill these application forms. And we will probably modify it based on feedback for when we have our open calls in 2022. And also for those projects, when we do run them, we will also have whatever lessons we learned from running the pilot project, we will apply to the open call projects. But at this stage, before they even submit, we are asking persons to consult with stakeholders before their final submission. And we had planned for them to have a national stakeholder workshop, but because of COVID, we just asked them to at least send their proposal to 3 persons and provide some feedback. And if they can incorporate the feedback, that will be good. But we just want to know that stakeholders were consulted before their final submission. Now, on the last point, it's that we had a project development and monitoring and evaluation workshop. So for the same draft applications, we actually evaluated them. At least 3 to 4 people would have looked at it, and we would have provided written feedback in some cases to the applicants. And we would have also had a session, a 1-hour working session with them to explain our feedback. And we believe that this would have strengthened their proposal in that they have a better understanding of the objectives of our program, and therefore be able to adopt their proposal to suit, to bring it within scope, time, budget, etc. At this point, I would like to allow Lennise to come in and say a few more words about the Hit Reset program and the approaches.
So this is one project that brought home for me what Michael Scriven describes as evaluation as a transdiscipline. Because where he said, because it's a discipline that allows other disciplines to do their job. It facilitates the work of other disciplines who need to learn what's going on in the projects that are implemented, etc. So I'm certainly learning this as I engage in this project. The thing as well, I am not an engineer or an urban planner or trained in any of the disciplines that the projects coming in, people coming in with those projects. I'm not trained in app development or anything like that. But what I am trained to do as an evaluator is ask about what are your challenges? What would you like to do differently next time? What is your methodology? Who did you sample? If you are building an app for a community, how much engagement of the community did you do to really understand their needs? You know, I can ask those questions and then have them rethink their processes. Because, you know, sometimes if you are in a particular field, doing things a particular way, because you now have that added dimension where the innovation piece must have a sustainability aspect to it. It must have a participatory aspect. It means that you know how to do your work differently. It was interesting sitting down in those feedback meetings where you had the four of us with four different skill sets providing feedback. Sometimes we agreed, sometimes we didn't, but it was interesting that we would we were able to provide feedback that all of the participants found that the feedback was helpful. Okay, and of course, this whole thing about working appreciatively is something that you do as an evaluator. You start from how did you get to this point? Tell me about what you're doing, and then we doing this, working this way as well. We got to understand what the person submitting the proposals really wanted to bring out in their project, so that the value, the value of the project for them was there. And of course, the innovation was all contextual. So whether it was an app that was being developed or something that was reactivating facilities in a country to get them working again. The interesting thing too is that these projects are supposed to be scaled up for the region. And it was important to us, and to me in particular, that if people are going to say, oh, it's good enough for Antigua and the Caribbean, if you didn't do your homework to understand what other countries, especially like the legislation or thing in other countries are, we have to find out about that, because we found in one particular case where a country team developed something that was completely applicable in their setting, but it was against the law in Trinidad and Tobago. And they were very quick to and the Caribbean all the time. So I'm just saying to you, things like that. So, an interesting project. I am learning just as much as Perry's learning, because I'm just adding to my skills. I will not be able to develop an app though, but I'll be able to talk about what I want to use it for, Okay. Perry?
Okay. Right. Thank you, Lennise. Okay. So in conclusion, I would like to say that there is need for M&E training for technical leads, and I refer to people who may have the ideas, maybe technically skilled and have ideas. Project designers, which are the people who might take the ideas of the technical leads and put it into a format, a project management format, and the project managers themselves to improve the design of future projects. So there is opportunity for the CEI to consider running training courses designed for these groups of people. And the reason I say this is that it's just like any scientific endeavor. if you want to do good science, you have to know how you're going to analyze your data in the end. And we want our projects to be impactful. So if we know how we're going to evaluate impact, then we can design our methodologies to achieve such. So that would be my key point there. Also, the idea of incorporating M&E evaluators into the project, I think improves the understanding of M&E for everybody. And it provides an opportunity for us to ask questions on an ongoing basis. So every aspect of the project is improved. So I think that how it worked well for the City Car Labs project, I find it's been working well for the Hit Reset Caribbean project. And I don't know if this might be the way for development projects in the future. But time will tell if it becomes something that we start to do. Okay, so thank you very much for your attention. And next slide, we'll have a couple of stakeholders. Sorry, okay, I think I clicked this off. All right, but thank you very much for your attention.
I want to thank the panelists very much for their contribution this afternoon, and for Perry for just stretching our minds a little bit, because M&E so far has been around health, it has been around education and social service delivery, and now we have M&E around that big topic of climate resilience and being prepared for it, and energy efficiency. And thank you very much for sharing what you did, because it now means that we as evaluators have to sharpen our skills to really apply the transdisciplinary approach as we do our work. So we are now at 7:31. Let me look, do we have any questions that we need to begin with? I have been looking, right. Right. I would like to begin with my first question. And my first question was even though people have spoken about it throughout, what is the importance of having the needs assessment of beneficiaries done before you actually design or conduct your evaluations? And anyone can start from the panel.
This is Sandra. I'll take that one, Lennise. Okay. I think the important thing about having a needs assessment before you start the project is so you can understand what those gaps are within the context that you're working in. I also think looking at those assets that the community brings and has helps, especially from an evaluation perspective, to really hone in on what those different components of the project's going to be. For me, as an empowerment evaluation, I'm always learning alongside of the community stakeholders, and also so because I'm external to the community, having a needs assessment in the beginning really helps with that. For me, it's the first step in that whole project design.
Do you want to share anything, Perry or Marsha or Mairette?
Yes, I'm in agreement with Sandra. I just want to emphasize the importance of the people-centeredness in the interventions we design, and the needs assessment. It really helps to ensure that the emphasis, the focus in terms of our design and even our implementation is on the beneficiaries of our intervention. So we want to ensure that by doing a needs assessment, the intervention is relevant to their needs, And as Sandra said, we know the gaps that exist, we know the assets, we can strengthen those. But most importantly, I think scaffolding, there's this concept of scaffolding that we need to engage more in. And once we know the needs, we can actually, and we know what the assets are, we can actually capitalize on those assets in order to achieve the kinds of changes in the lives of these individuals that we are targeting.
Perry, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I would just like to say that our built environment projects target planning and management. So we are trying to improve processes, and hopefully when they improve, the impact will be felt by communities. Now, that in itself is a little bit of a cop-out, because what it means is that we don't really do sufficient analysis of the needs of the communities. We may read the literature and have an understanding of it, but we don't think that the outputs of our project are going to immediately affect those communities. And that's not a good way of thinking, because if we start to talk about our app project, as Lennise mentioned in the presentation, here it is, instead of trying to entrench something in a planning agency for them to implement, we are, for example, trying to support the development of an app that can impact security for travelers. So that is one, it's going directly to the community and, you know, the traveling community, the commuters. And it puts decision-making in the hands of commuters. So we may have to start rethinking, dependent on the types of projects that we do, that we have to understand the needs of the communities. And we are actually putting pressure on the sub-grantees to do that for us. Yes. So we are also having to adapt to the nature of our projects, understanding that citizens and can also directly benefit more quickly from our intervention.
Mairette.
Yeah, I'm just sitting here thinking, you know, in an ideal world, that needs assessment is really a non-negotiable. But we don't work in an ideal world. And very often, you know, Perry just touched on it, you know, when he spoke, but we rely on, you know, desk reviews, we rely on the perspectives and opinions and writings of other persons, and we don't always go directly to the people who are going to be impacted. And that, you know, I mean, there are a host of reasons for that, financial and time and political, but I think it's kind of a no-brainer in an ideal that that's what we should do. I can say with some amount of confidence from my experience that whenever we do a needs assessment before we begin a program, like a, let's say, training program with educators, and I'm using that because I do a lot of those. When we do a decent needs analysis, and of course a needs analysis is only as good as the items and the way in which you gather the data, but when we do it well and thoroughly, we are generally surprised at some of the things that we find. So I think that, again, that I'm just offering that as a further sort of, support for the idea that it is important, but it's not always possible. It's not always feasible. And for us too, I think in my organization, one of the things, and you put it so beautifully earlier, you know, monitoring and evaluation from a distance. For us, very often, we are depending on technology to gather this data. We are depending on both offline and online, but it's still technology. But in some parts of the world, that is really hard, and you're automatically leaving out large groups of people, because you know, we had some of it this afternoon ourselves. I mean, you know, bandwidth issues, connectivity issues, and we're seeing that digital divide playing out in the post-COVID world, certainly in the teaching and learning environment. So I think the same is true of the way in which we sometimes depend on conducting these needs analysis. Yeah.
Thank you, Mairette. We have a question for you for Marsha, sorry. And the question is whether you would suggest using this community resilience index tool, community renewal, index tool in other countries. Have you thought about it? And then, of course, how responsive have planners been to the tool?
Thank you for that question. One of the reasons we decided to innovate is based on our recognition that such a tool did not exist in Jamaica or regionally. And we know certainly that we share some of the same characteristics with other countries as it pertains to having, you know, communities that are vulnerable and communities that are volatile. Certainly, our index is it's context specific in the sense that we are supporting the achievement of our national goals under Vision 2030 Jamaica. However, the plan itself and the outcomes are aligned to the SDGs. So on that basis, I would say there is an opportunity to replicate this tool in other countries if these kinds of linkages exist between the national development plan of those countries and the SDGs. Because as it stands right now, we have that kind of alignment from the level of the index to the outcome level of Vision 2030 Jamaica, and certainly for the SDGs. And we're very open to working with other individuals in other countries to see how we can replicate and adapt this tool to their particular context. In terms of the responsiveness, we have been inundated, and I'm using that in a positive way, with requests from a number of agencies and state and non-state actors, even IDPs, for information on the tool and also access to the data that we have used to generate the index for these communities. In addition, we have been using it certainly within the context of what we do to have all the various partners coalesce around a common agenda of, you know, addressing the gaps that exist in these communities. The Planning Institute of Jamaica does not implement the community renewal program, but we provide the mechanism within which the various implementing entities can work within to design and to implement, monitor, and report on the efforts that they are on the interventions that they're delivering in these spaces. So in that regard, you know, we have the opportunity to ensure that the efforts are informed by evidence, the implementation is guided by the evidence, and that we remain results focused. Another thing I'd like to add is that we have had a lot of interest from the political representatives of these communities. They've reached out to us, they've asked for access to the index, to whatever information we have, because their intention is to engage their constituents to see, and to also engage, you know, other players to see how they can work together to improve the quality of life and the standard of living in these communities. I hope I've adequately addressed the question.
Thank you, Marsha. Yesterday we had a presenter, Anne-Marie, and she said one of the roles that she's found herself playing as an evaluator is that of a conflict manager. Maybe I'm not using the right word, but she found herself having to help people navigate conflicts that they have had in terms of planning and implementation and cooperating, because I think one of the roles that I find myself thinking about very often when I do my evaluations is that I have to teach people how to cooperate, to teach people that they can really work together, or that they're thinking about the same thing, though they may be coming at it from a different perspective. Do we have is there anyone else who would like to ask a question?
Hi, Lennise. There's some
Yes.
questions in the chat.
Okay. I'm seeing comments. There's a comment
There's
for
one
Perry.
from- Yeah, there
Sorry. Go ahead.
are quite a few. I can read.
Right. I've been stressed now. So I seen the comment for Perry, said I do agree with Perry with the idea of continuous M&E capacity building for different key stakeholders. I can relate to it as we do similar with the skills for youth and employment program in St. Lucia, Grenada, Dominica, and St. Vincent. So that's Hyacinth Dolian. I had gone through it before. Nicole, I've gone through all of the comments before. Marcia Brandon says it would be so interesting to apply this to development impact of the private sector and communities in which they exist, to see how impactful they really are and the contributions they're making. And I think it was, again, the same tool, Marsha, that Marcia Brandon was speaking about. Right, we are 10 minutes away, well, 15 minutes away from the end. Is there anybody who would like to make a comment or ask a question at this time? Anybody else?
There's a question from Shelley.
Okay.
And it's directed at Marsha.
Okay, Marsha.
I know the project in 2011, but the index was created in 2020, right? Is there any way to see the scores over time as early in the project as possible?
That's an excellent question from Shelley. And one of the challenges that we have had is the availability of community level data with the kind of currency and detail that we want. We certainly have access to national and parish level data in Jamaica. But one of the challenges we had was really, accessing this kind of data for what for our purposes. And therefore, one of the decisions we took as we developed the index was to do our primary data collection. As we move forward and as we seek to improve the index and as we apply it to more communities, our aim is to see how we can garner support for the institutions that are producers of data, particularly at the community level, to see how we can have this kind of data being collected more frequently and to really alleviate the burden that's placed on resources, especially now when it is so limited. Another thing that we're seeking to do is to leverage the census data that we have and to see how we can perhaps generate some core indicators that are the strong. Well, we know what the strongest determinants of community renewal are, but we certainly want to ensure that we leverage the statin data to see that to measure those determinants and perhaps see if we can have a more robust tool that we can apply as we move forward.
I want to bring in Sandy here for a minute, and also Marsha, you could then share your experiences. So Sandy, would you like to talk a little bit about what happened when we went back to the communities with the information, with the data?
I'm sorry?
Would you like to speak a little bit about when we went back to the communities to report on what we had found with the communities, how they responded to our analyses?
Well, I think for the most part, what we did was we took the information back and we asked for the community members to review it, tell us whether or not they agreed or disagreed with it. And I think for the most part, people were in agreement. I think one of the things that looking at those scores helped do was generate some more conversation and get some more detail into the specifics about what was going on in those communities. I think the approach that we took as far as having people work independently, then us pooling the data and then taking it back to the communities was a process that probably helped for that, of course, the community buy-in, and also to prompt those community members once they looked at the data to help us interpret it. So I think that it added a lot of the context around the data when they were able to see it. I only think we might have had some maybe one or two folks who were kind of like, well, that's not exactly the way I see it. But even that disagreement spawned some more conversation that I really think helped those community members really have a dialogue around those different interpretations of the data. So I think that that dialogue helped us to understand some of those leverage points, some of those things that were going on in the community that were being perceived differently by the different community members.
Okay, thanks, Sandy. So I asked Sandy to make that comment, Marsha, because I want to ask you then, now that you've done this and you have a sense of what is happening with your communities, I know the aim was not to rank communities against each other, but really to focus on what the development needs are for your initiatives. Did you share at all the criteria or any of your tool development with the communities?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
And interestingly, the first thing they latched onto were the rankings, you know, so
Right.
so there were some who were, of course, disappointed, and there were others that, you know, it's like a race, and we're in the first position, you're last, that kind of thing. But you know, we ensured that we highlighted, you know, the intention of you know, of the tool and how we wanted the information to be utilized. We also made sure to emphasize the fact that a community that's ranked #1 in 2020 could rank #10 in 2022. It could rank, you know, #17, or it could be, you know, at the bottom of the cohort of communities that the index is applied to, you know, in successive years. It doesn't mean that the community is not improving. It just means that perhaps other communities, you know, are making progress in other areas that this community is not doing so well in. But maybe, or it may be that the progress is also, there's just so much competitiveness in the scores that have resulted based on the, you know, the kinds of interventions that have been delivered. So that was something we made sure to emphasize, you know, because that's the first thing, you know, that they latched onto. But they were certainly in agreement with the dimensions and the measures that we utilize. It mattered to them. And I think that is very important when we develop these tools. You know, as policymakers, sometimes we just focus on the policy, and sometimes it's divorced from the very people who these policies are aimed at. So that validation session was very, very instructive for us. And with that, we were able to certainly make adjustments with, you know, as needed to ensure that the voice of the community was heard.
Right, we do have two other questions here, and one, well, comments and questions. They said when you talk about community renewal, we may make assumptions about what renewal is. What was the definition of renewal in the project, and renew to what? And it would be interesting to see if the communities are renewing or regressing. And then another person as part of that was saying, would the indices also have to change over time? What was your response, Marsha?
All right, so perhaps you know, I was having internet challenges, but one of the things I had indicated was the definition that we had agreed on of a renewed community. And this definition is aligned to Vision 2030 Jamaica and the 4 goals that speak to you know, prosperity, security, cohesion, having healthy environments, etc. And because the community renewal program is aligned to those specific goals, we wanted to ensure that from a measurement perspective, we were focusing on what mattered within the context of national development, and certainly at the micro level with respect to communities. So based on those principles and factors, we agreed that we wanted a renewed community to be defined as one that has been transformed from volatile and vulnerable to secure, cohesive, just, prosperous, with healthy environments. And those form the basis for the 5 dimensions that we have and the specific measures or indicators that are associated with each of those 5 dimensions. So that's the definition of a renewed community. Now, how will we know when a community has been renewed? What we want to do, we can't know immediately at this point because we just applied the index for the first time. But what we want to do over time is to establish benchmarks, and those benchmarks can establish the threshold that we can use to determine whether or not a community has crossed the threshold to be classified as renewed, so to speak. The other thing that we have utilized, particularly at the indicator level, is using targets from policies, so policy targets, at the national level, national program targets to form the benchmark for these indicators. So, for example, for security, we know that we want secure communities, and it means therefore that we want 0 crimes. Right? We want 0 shootings, we want 0 murders. And that became, for example, one of the benchmarks that we use, one of, in terms of calculating where communities were relative to that particular target. But generally speaking, in terms of in terms of renewal, that's one of the key things that we are seeking to prioritize. What is the benchmark that a community has to attain? What is the standard it needs to attain to be classified as renewed? Did I miss anything? Was there a third question?
I think no, you're fine. You're talking about whether there was about whether you would need to change indices over time. But as you just explained about when the definition of renewed, you would revisit it, right? And then revisit the community to see whether they had met the benchmarks. Am I saying anything correctly?
Right, so the definition will not change, but typically with an index, it improves with time and with the availability of data, because sometimes the indicators that you use are proxy because you don't have data for the indicator that you would like to have. So certainly as the data becomes available, the kind of currency that we would like, then we will make improvements to the indicators. And of course, all of those will be declared in our subsequent reports, if that happens. The other thing that can change are the weights for the dimensions. So there can be marginal increases or decreases in the weights for the specific dimensions. Those are 2 ways in which the index can change, but what is constant, what will be constant are the dimensions and the definition of a renewed community.
So Karen, thank you very much. We do have one more question, but because I know I want to keep to the time and wrap up. If the question is, how does the culture of a country or region impact, hinder, or assist M&E initiatives, or how do you overcome those challenges? I would like, the panelists I will send you the question. If you could send us back something which we could then distribute, that would be very nice. Okay, if you could, I'll send you the question and you could give us a written response. I need to wrap up so that I make the 8 o'clock cutoff time. We heard 4 presentations this afternoon that dealt with M&E in the Caribbean context. The first was an example of a community renewal program in Jamaica, which found a way to find indices to review and measure security in communities, justice, health and environment, community cohesion, and prosperity, because they wanted to transform these communities from away from being volatile and vulnerable to being productive and secure and safe. And so they came up with this tool that was supposed to help them guide any development initiatives, any measures that or strategies that will be used to help these communities fill their gaps and become more cohesive communities. We heard a second example from the Commonwealth of Learning that had to do with the challenges around remote project management and remote M&E, and how they have transformed, and they're looking now at using more of a utilization focused approach to their work by having more stakeholder engagement about what is it that you need to know to make progress and to progress the work, right? And you're the only developer. Then we heard from the third presenter, Dr. Sandra Ortega, who deals and works in the violence prevention arena, just about an innovation had around collecting data in a community, and the innovation was about keeping everybody safe and protecting the information sources, as you would say, something that all evaluators should keep in mind. And what using this QSORT methodology did to sort of tease out the perspectives of the community while still maintaining their anonymity, but everybody's contribution fed into the final analysis of what was going on in the community for community cohesion and safety issues. And finally, we heard from Dr. Perry Pola, who took us into a completely different sphere, M&E region, because we should be thinking about climate resilience issues. And so there are projects that are around that are focusing the M&E usage to really give them the information they need to provide better products for us and better information for us to really develop and become a more resilient people. So we are at 8:01. I would like to thank all the panelists for really contributing to this session this afternoon. Thank the attendees for being so attentive and so orderly. And thank you to Nicole, who provided technical assistance to me throughout the session. And we have our president, Barry Gordon, who was on and who's been working in the background to make sure everything was going okay as we went along. So this is day 2. There are 2 more sessions to go, and I promise you that the excitement, I would use excitement, but the quality of the presentations will not decrease. They will certainly improve as we go to the end of our week. So thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon, and thank you especially to our panelists. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you for a good presentation and webinar.